Welcome to the Nurse Shark Academy Show, a Baxter Professional Services production. Welcome to the Nurse Shark Academy Show, where we're experts in nursing and experts in business. I'm Tina Baxter, your host. The Nurse Shark Academy Show highlights nurse business owners and others in the healthcare field who promote entrepreneurship. We interview nurse leaders and encourage them to tell their story. Today's guest is Matt Norman. In today's episode, how one nurse turned burnout into hope for nursing. Attention nurses, looking to take your nursing knowledge and turn it into a viable business? Ready to take action, but don't know where to start? Join the Nurse Shark Academy. We support nurses as business owners and leaders. We offer career and entrepreneurial coaching for nurses or other healthcare professionals. Whether you're a brand new nurse, a seasoned health professional, or building a startup, join a community of support. Entrepreneurship can be lonely, but it doesn't have to be. Our career and business coaching services are designed to help you achieve the life-work balance you desire. Our experienced coaches will help you identify and attain your career and business goals, enabling you to become more successful in both your personal and professional life. I'm Tina Baxter. I founded the Nurse Shark Academy because I believe every nurse is a hero on his or her own epic journey. Nurses are launching new businesses every day. You don't have to do it alone. Join the Nurse Shark Academy and get the support, training, and coaching that you need to launch your successful nurse business. Become a member at the nursesharkacademy.biz. Hello and welcome to the Nurse Shark Academy Show, where we're experts in nursing and experts in business. I'm Tina Baxter, your host. The Nurse Shark Academy Show highlights nurse business owners and others in the healthcare field who promote entrepreneurship. We interview nurse leaders and encourage them to tell their story. My mission is for you to own your seat at the table of nurse entrepreneurship, gaining the confidence, skills, and freedom to live your life on your own terms. You will dream big and expand your consciousness as an entrepreneur. Join us and support these wonderful nurse entrepreneurs and leaders. Today's guest is Matt Norman of restoringnurses.com out of Florida. Matt is married to his high school sweetheart. He's also have two wonderful children and will be a soon grandpa. He's been a nurse for 24 years. He's a pastor as well. He's worked with many people going through difficult times in their lives. And he's the author of The Restored Nurse and Healthy Start for Nurses, as well as the owner of Restoring Nurses. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you, Tina. I'm very glad to be here.
So as always, I'd like to start the show by asking you the very important question. What made you become a nurse?
It's actually a funny story because I growing up, I didn't even consider it an option. I mean, it wasn't something I had ever thought of. When I started nursing school, I was married and knew that I needed to have some way to support my family. Didn't have any children yet, but knew we were going to. And my mother was a nurse. My grandmother was a nurse. So I thought, well, I can go do that and make a decent income and kind of see where it goes from there, you know. Once I got into it, though, I figured out I really love taking care of people and just kind of stuck with it. Once I got into it, I loved it.
And so you had that legacy to fall back on, seeing your family members that were nurses to kind of introduce you into the field. So what was your first job as a nurse?
Well, I went right out of nursing school into the emergency department, which back then was pretty rare. I graduated in 2000. These days, you have nurse residency programs for folks that want to go directly into specialty areas. But back then, we didn't. But I had worked for about 3 years in the emergency department as a tech. So when I graduated, it felt like an easy transition. It ended up being a little more difficult than I anticipated. But I worked in that ER. I ended up spending almost 20 years in that ER.
You know, and that's kind of rare because a lot of nurses move around a lot, right? We start off maybe in med-surg or in some other area, and we kind of, move around, which is fine. But you chose to stay in the ER. What are some of the things that you learned by being in the emergency room?
Well, a couple of things. For one, I heard a pastor say one time that we should take our jobs seriously, but never take ourselves too seriously. And I learned in the emergency department, and really I think this applies to most of areas of nursing, that is a matter of survival. Our job is very, very serious, but we have to be able to learn to laugh at ourselves, sometimes at the circumstances. So don't take ourselves too seriously. I also realized that, when you're dealing with, I mean, I've seen probably hundreds of people die. Okay. And when you're dealing with that much death, you realize that most of the other things we deal with in life are really pretty small. They may feel really big in the moment, but when it compares to somebody dying or somebody losing a loved one or losing a limb or something like that, then it may be annoying, it may be aggravating, but most of it's pretty small. So that keeps me pretty laid back and not too bothered by very many things.
What struck me was you said you saw maybe hundreds of people die, and I thought about my nursing career myself, and I thought I've never even thought to think about or quantify the number of people that I've seen die. My background is in long-term care, hospice, and psychiatry, and unfortunately, I've seen people die in all of those areas, particularly obviously in hospice, but it just made me think. I said, over the 20 plus years I've been a nurse, it's something that we see every day. And a lot of people don't appreciate the impact that that can have on you if you do not have good resources to help you deal with that. Um, I appreciate where I work now because anytime there is a death, my supervisor comes to let me know. And I joke with her. I said the only time you ever call me is because of bad news. So who's
Yeah.
gone now? But I think that's our defense mechanism, right?
Yeah.
And we need to be able to process some of that. And unfortunately, so many other nurses that I've been seeing, particularly our new grads, um, haven't been able to process the impact that they've been seeing with the death and everything, particularly going through the pandemic. And so I think those types of issues probably need to be talked about a little bit more.
Yeah. I totally agree, and that's a big part of the reason I do what I do. When I started when I got on TikTok and started kind of doing nursing content on TikTok, I initially said, yeah, I initially kind of wanted to address some of the issues in nursing and in healthcare. And as I started to do that, I realized there's already a lot of people doing that. And I didn't want to add to the noise, so to speak. But instead, as I thought about it more, I really wanted to encourage nurses because you're absolutely right. We deal with things that most of the population have no idea we see or deal with. Okay. Most people will go their entire life and maybe see one or two or a handful of people die, and maybe it's a family member that was in hospice or, something like that. And they were there when they passed away. We see it all the time, especially in some of the specialty areas like ICU, emergency department, hospice. And so I have worked hard to kind of provide a safe place and I end most of my videos on TikTok telling folks that my inbox is always open. And I realize that's a little dangerous because I never know who might send me a message. But at the same time, I want nurses to be able to know that when they have that terrible day and they don't know who to talk to, that they can shoot me a message and we can talk it out.
Well, I have to tell you, as a person that is on social media, Med Twitter, excuse me, X now, but was really what helped me a couple of times because I'm like having a really bad day, had a really bad session with a patient, things went south, just horrible. And I get on Med Twitter, and I see somebody often from the ER is like, "Yeah, I got punched in the face today by a patient," and I was thinking, well, at least I didn't get punched today in the face. And they make a joke of it. They have a video of it. We're just laughing and joking. And I read some of the comments from other people's day, and I said, you know what? I had a rough day with this patient, but it was nearly not as bad as yours. So clearly it gives me some perspective. And so I appreciate that because as one of those nurses that sometimes goes to social media to get that lift, to get a laugh, I don't always want to hear about the problems that we have in nursing because I know that there are many. And there's actually been a study that recently came out that a lot of potential nurses are opting out and leaving nursing school because they've seen the negativity on social media.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that. I'm in a couple of groups on Facebook with nursing students, with experienced nurses like myself, trying to encourage nursing students. And I saw this young person was starting nursing school and was talking about TikTok specifically and all the negativity that they see on there. And the reality is that a lot of folks are trying to do good work. Okay. They're
Yes.
trying to highlight the things that are wrong. But when that it seems to be all you hear, then the weight becomes very heavy. I spoke to a nurse. I was doing some education at my job at the hospital, and one of the nurses that was in my class, it was actually orientation. She was a fairly new nurse, and I told her I'd been, mentioned to the class that I've been a nurse for 24 years, and she said, "Oh no, not me." She said 5 or 6 years is my max. Her plan was to only spend a few years in nursing. Now I don't know what she planned to do after that or what her thought process was, but it kind of struck me that that is becoming more the norm. I mean, some people are getting into this knowing I'm not going to be here for 20 or 30 years. And a big part of that is what you're saying, that all they hear is the nurses complaining.
Yes.
I think that I've got some beautiful stories from my nursing career that I share when I speak. And I think we miss those stories that, unlike any other career, a carpenter has a great job, but he's never going to he or she is never going to have some of the sort of impact that we have as nurses. And we lose track of that and get kind of buried in all the negativity if we're not careful.
I see that more and more as I've been on social media. And one of the things that has struck me, and when you were saying about the nurse that was planning on leaving in about 5 or 6 years, when I was started in nursing, there was this conversation that we had about the refrigerator nurse. I don't know if you've heard of this, but the
No.
nurse that would get her job, because usually typically women, so would get her job, become a nurse, work for 5 or 6 years to marry the doctor or whatever that she wants to do, then leave and have babies, and then would only go back to work for like a couple years or so because she needed to buy a new refrigerator, she needed a new sofa or whatever else to make the money. And that was an actual phenomenon years
Oh
ago.
yeah. Yeah.
And it made me think about what the other side of social media that people don't understand is that they see the nurses that are travelers and they come in with their Gucci bags and their figs on, and they look all great, cool and everything, and they got the money, and they're like, I'm going to this show because I have 2 weeks off because I decided not to pick up a contract, all this other stuff, that they see the glamour but they miss the day to day. And so we get people that come into nursing who want the glamour and the glitz, but forget about, the poop on your shoe, or the blood that's splattered on your uniform. They forget those things, and they are so disenchanted with nursing when they find out that there's real work involved and people's lives are at stake.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a difficult balance because one of the things I do when when I have the opportunity to speak to nursing students, I want them to know how hard it is. Okay. I want them to know about the struggles and the difficulties that we have. At the same time, though, I balance that with the stories of how beautiful it can be as well. I want them to see both sides of it. They need to have a realistic view. I think way too many of us, we get out of nursing school, and like you said, we don't know. We don't know how tough it is, or how dirty or how nasty it can be. And then we get new nurses out here, and they burn out, and they get very disenchanted very quickly. And so I try and give them both sides of that.
Or they get promoted too quickly and
Yes.
they join the clackety clack brigade, is like I like to call them, the nurses that wear their high heels, and they're no longer a bedside nurse because, hey, I don't have to do that anymore, but I'm going to be making policy for you. So we kind of perpetuate that, you know, cycle where people are like, well, I had to endure it, so now you have to endure it. Instead of, hey, how about we make things better for everyone? And that's what I'm going to work towards.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. And so what made you go into entrepreneurship? How did you start your business?
Well, I mentioned in my TikTok that I decided I wanted to encourage nurses, and that really was the catalyst for getting into business. I want to, throughout my career. You mentioned I've been a nurse 24 years, and for much of that time, I've also been a pastor, and so I've really had opportunity to work with people, whether it was coworkers that were going through difficult life stuff, or were dealing with difficulties at work, or patients and their family members, whoever it was. I have worked with lots of people that were going through really difficult times. And I, so back in 2019, this was kind of the moment where I realized something had to change in my life and career. And then the lessons I've learned from that have led me to restoring nurses. In 2019, I was ready to leave nursing completely. I had been a nurse almost 20 years and was done. And I began a process in that moment to figure out, how do I build the life I actually want to live? Okay. Not just a life that's dominated by my work or whatever, the life I want to live. And out of that, I began a journey to rebuild my life into something that looked more like what I had always envisioned it to be. And I ended up falling back in love with nursing. I ended up with healthier relationships, healthier finances, better physical health, and still, obviously, I'm still working on these things. I have not arrived in any of these. None of these things are perfect because, unfortunately, I'm human. But that moment when I can still remember, I was standing in the woods. The church I was going to at the time was on a big piece of property with a bunch of trees. And I'm standing among the trees in the back, and it's the middle of the day. I literally looked up at the sky and screamed, hoping that God would hear me. Screamed out, "I just want to love nursing again." And I know that a lot of nurses feel the same way. And I'm convinced that while there are a lot of things that need to be fixed in healthcare, I worry that we become too focused on those things that we cannot control. We need to do what we can. We need to seek out better legislation. We need to encourage or pressure our employers to put better policies in place, et cetera, et cetera. However, I can't fix those things. I can fix how I talk to my wife or children. I can fix how I spend my money and budget and these things. I can fix these other things. And as a result, my entire life gets better. And then when healthcare improves, which I do believe it's going to, I believe it's going to be an uphill battle, but healthcare is going to come out of this better than it is currently. I do believe that. But when it does, if I haven't fixed these other things, then I'm going to get to that other end and my life is still going to be terrible.
Yes.
My job may be better, but my life is going to be exactly the same. We can't wait for healthcare to fix our lives. We've got to fix our lives. And then when healthcare gets better, then everything is better. So it was that moment where I'm yelling, "I just want to love being a nurse again," that started my journey. And from there became restoring nurses.
Well, it's so interesting to hear that from a different perspective, because a lot of times we think, oh, if I could just get, the shift that I want, the shift change that I need, or maybe if I get our hospital to hire some additional staff, or we put in staffing ratios. I don't think it's going to fix everything.
Mm-mm.
And it always takes time. If we look back at the history of nursing, it's always been at the beginning of a movement that we've had these changes in nursing, right? The fact that nursing became a profession was often tied to the suffragette movement.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to understand our history and how we got here to understand how we can affect change. And
Yeah.
you're right, we can't do it. We're not going to do it overnight. It was never an overnight thing. It is one system at a time, one stronghold at a time that we have to tear down and
Yeah.
rebuild. But what are we rebuilding to? And that's the question I always have. What do we want future of nursing, our model that we can aspire to? What do we want it to look like?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, and I totally agree with you that we work on those things, and that has to happen. My biggest fear, and this is the kind of the backbone for what I do with restoring nurses. I've known people that were depressed, that were overweight and depressed, and had weight loss surgery, lost a lot of weight, and were still depressed because the problem wasn't the weight. Now, the weight may have been a factor. It may have made, but it wasn't the thing. It didn't, when it went away, it didn't fix their problem. And sometimes those people end up actually more depressed because they thought this thing was supposed to fix my problem. There's a podcast I love to listen to, a mental health podcast, and the host, something he says all the time is, wherever you go, there you are. In other words, when you get there, if you haven't changed you, then that version of you is still there at the other end. So I think, yes, we need to, as you point out, we need to think about the healthcare that we want to build. That what does nursing look like? This improved version of our healthcare system that we're working toward. What does that look like? But at the same time, what does my life look like? What does an improved version of my life look like? I think that's a great point.
It's becoming the nurse that you have in your mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to become that fulfilled nurse that gets up and goes to work. And not every day is going to be sunshine and rainbows. I get that, right? But
Absolutely.
I also know that I'm in control over how I respond and react to what's happening in my day. And if I show up grumpy and in a bad mood every day, guess what? It's going to rub off on my colleagues. It's going to rub off on my patients. It's going to rub off on the people that come in contact with me. And I have to do the work starting with me first in order for me to help affect change in others. If you're both miserable, who's going to help you become happier, right? Who's going to bring in the joy? Who's going to bring the light if you're both sitting there in the dark? And so you need to have that. And I appreciate the social media influencers out there. There's nurses that have become comedians, and they're great at it. And they use comedy to shed light on some very dark things that happen in nursing. But on the flip side of that, if that's all you talk about, if that's all you see, it makes you wonder, is there something worth fighting for in nursing?
Yeah. It's one of those balances, we have to be aware of where we're at, but we have to have a vision. And I'll be honest, in what I'm seeing on social media, and I think you kind of mentioned that as well, there are nurses doing great work in highlighting the issues. But what I don't hear is a lot of vision casting. What does this better version of nursing look like? What does nursing look like 10 years from now or 20 years from now that's better? I could walk by the mirror or get on my scale every day and go, wow, I'm overweight. Okay. But if I don't have a vision for two things, for what it looks like to no longer be overweight, what does that number look like? How do I feel? What does it look like? What do I look like in the mirror? How do my clothes fit, etc.? If I don't have a vision for that, then it makes it really hard to get from here to there. The other thing we have to have is, once you know where we're going, what are the steps? And without first having that vision, I like to think of it as a road trip. So if we're going to take a road trip, we have to first have a destination. We have to know where we're going. Okay, we can sit here and talk about where we're at all we want, and it gets us no closer to where we're going until we first identify where we're going. That's that vision for the future that you're talking about. And then number two, what are the steps to get me from where we're currently at to that vision? And right now, and maybe it's maybe that's the right place. Maybe we're in that right place right now where we need to still be talking about where we're at so that we can understand it. But at some point we have to transition and start talking about what does the future look like? Where are we headed? And then how do we get there?
One of the I so agree. And one of the things I think about is what I'm encouraged by when I see on social media are organizations that are looking at the model and saying, okay, what can we change to make it better? And so there's things like out there for nurse reimbursement so that we
Mhm.
reimburse for the care that we give. I've also seen a coalition called Nurses on Boards, and I happen to be affiliated with them and got one of my board appointments through that organization. And so we're seeing that, hey, wait a minute, we need to be at the table. And years ago, that was something that we never even thought of. In fact, I remember everybody saying, oh, they're doing committee assignments. I'm going to run the other way so I don't have to be on the committee, right?
Right.
But now, as nurses, we're seeing, hey, wait a minute, we need to step up. We need to be sitting at the table where the decisions are made. And I think that is so very important. I had a conversation with a nurse recently, and she talked about how the board of nursing basically has this grip on nurses' future, and there's no peer review process in a lot of our states, so
Mhm.
that it could be a nurse that's not been a nurse forever, been in academia forever, who is passing judgment on a nurse that's active in at the bedside. And maybe they're not the same specialty, maybe they're not the same degree. It's all those things where they're passing this judgment on you. And now, if you're in a compact, state, and you have a compact license, you get disciplined in one state for one thing. They'll discipline you in another state because of it, because they heard about it. And how is that not double jeopardy? And it's all those issues that we don't know as nurses, and we're just starting
Mhm.
to wake up to some of these things.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. We absolutely. I mean, here's the deal: in an average hospital, nurses outnumber every other person in the building.
Yes.
Every other person by a significant margin. You look at my hospital, the where I work. There's around 1,000 nurses, and there's maybe a dozen PTs. Okay.
Yes.
The numbers just don't, and I have mad respect for all of my the other healthcare workers from environmental services on up, respiratory therapy, PT, OT, all those folks. They do amazing work, and the reality is what we do in the hospital can't happen without them, but we outnumber all of them combined in many cases. Okay. And that means that what is good for us is good for all the rest of them as well. Okay. And for that reason, we need to be at the table at a micro level within our hospital. And I don't mean shared governance committees that don't actually do anything. I
Yes.
remember years ago, I was at a hospital that, I mean, shared governance can be done well. It's just not very often that it is done well. I was at a hospital. I was part of a shared governance committee. The hospital was working towards magnet designation, and I was on the shared governance committee representing the emergency department. And we were talking, we're talking about some things and, making some suggestions to administration, all of which they shot down. Then admin came to us and said, okay, we're going to standardize scrub colors, and we're going to let you guys make that decision. Well, the nurses in the room were just so excited that we were going to get to make that decision. Well, I'm sorry, but that was a BS decision.
Yes.
That was not empowering to me at all. In fact, it did quite the opposite. It said you can't be trusted with any real decisions, so we're going to give you this one that actually doesn't affect anything, but we're going to give it to you because you're too dumb to realize that we're lowballing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a, and I'm also not talking about, like you said, a CNO that hasn't been bedside in a decade or more. Okay. I'm talking current bedside nurse in board meetings,
Yes.
current or at least recent bedside nurse with the authority to make policies, obviously as part of the team, okay, but the people that are out there actually still doing it need to at least have a voice and an influence when these policies that they're going to have to carry out are made. Because so years ago, I did informatics for a few years. And when I first started, I was in meetings almost every day. By the time I stepped down from that position 4 years later, I was almost in no meetings. And I'm 100% convinced the reason they stopped inviting me to meetings was because I would look at them and go, well, we tried that and it didn't work. Or,
Mm-hmm.
or I've been in the ER for a dozen years at that point or whatever. I don't think that's going to work. Or, the question was always, well, what are other hospitals doing? Well, you know what? That's good, but why don't we try something new? And because I
Oh, the
was,
new word.
well, I believe in evidence-based practice. So
Mm-hmm.
that's great. That needs to happen. But evidence comes from someplace. That doesn't mean that nobody ever tries anything new. It means that people are constantly trying new things. And you've got to, as an organization, say, okay, we're going to try something new, but then we're going to test it to make sure it works. That's how evidence-based practice works. It's not just, let's find out what everybody else is doing and then copy that. Okay. So anyway, I was punished. My influence was lessened because I dared to speak up. And that's very discouraging to nurses. And what you end up with is the reality that nurses actually don't have a voice in those rooms. They may be sitting at the table, but they don't have a voice.
And that's unfortunate. And I remember informatics sitting on the hospital committee at the first hospital that I worked in, a second actually. And they were like, we're going to go to this new electronic system. This is when, computerized charting first came out in the hospitals. And we had doctors quit and nurses quit because they didn't want to, learn the system because they were like, I'm too old. I'm just going to go and retire. So we get the system, and I'll never forget, they were so proud of it. They're like, we called it Piggy for whatever reason. It was an acronym, Piggy. And they're like, we're going to bring in Piggy, and it's going to be great, and it's going to speed up our charting, and blah, 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 blah. And we've got a system that's 10 years old, and we know that it's all the bugs are out of it. And I'm looking at it, and I was like, wait, what? And then they said, oh, yeah, and we got these computers. They were like 5 years old. And I'm like, you bought used computers? Because we know that it's going to work. And I'm just like, are you insane? I said, you need to get new computers, a system that you've tested and make sure it works, not something that's like 10 years old that you've pieced together and Frankenstein together because you think it's going to work. But that's what they did.
Yeah.
And I was basically shot down from that meeting. And I'm like, yeah, you're talking to a person that took a computer science course in junior high. Okay. This is not going to work. And of course, within 2 years, they're rehauling the entire system.
Right. At a significant cost that they could have done skipped had they just listened.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's this misconception that the higher you get up the chain, the more intelligent you must be. And you know what? That is not even close to true. I've worked with physicians that did not have an ounce of sense, had tons of education, and I'm not just discrediting or disrespecting their education, but they did not have any sense, and they certainly. Yeah, and exactly. And I've worked with nurses that were the same way. I've worked with LPNs all the way up to masters and even doctor level nurses that didn't have any sense, and some that were absolutely brilliant. And I think that we forget a lot of the nurses that work the bedside do it because they want to. They do it because they don't want to be the boss. They don't want to. When I look at the amount of extra hours that the leaders in my hospital work, I don't want any part of that. That's why I'm in education. I leave at the end of the day and I do not think about that place till I come back the next day, so it's a choice. That does not mean that the CNO is smarter than me. And my CNO is she's wonderful, as with our assistant CNO. They're both great. They both highly respect me, and they'll ask me questions and actually consider my input. But I wonder how often they're doing that with line level staff.
Right.
You know, because they're I'm not any smarter than the line level staff, and they know a lot of things I don't because I've not been at bedside for a number of years. So we need to ask them what they think.
I had a nursing home administrator look me in my face and tell me that the nurses don't know what they're talking about. And I'm like, sir, you just got here. We've been here. I'm going to stick up for my nurses. I'm the nurse practitioner, but I'm going to stick up for my nurses. And I know that this family did say that they were going to buy this house with this woman's money so that she could come live with them. And they took the money from her, put her in the nursing home, bought the house, and left her there. I said, that did happen. Your nurses aren't delusional.
Yeah.
They know that she is being financially exploited. My question to you, sir, is why do you feel the need to negate what the nurses are telling you? And why are you protecting this family? Needless to say, he didn't last long as an administrator. In fact, he sort of did a disappearing act, and he was very paranoid and believed that people were out to get him. And that his office was bugged. So he wouldn't go into the administrator's office. He went into like a little like side office, was no bigger than a closet, because he didn't trust being in the administrator's office. And I'm thinking, do we have some underlying undisclosed mental health issues that we have not talked about? But yeah, he lasted like maybe 6 months, and then he took all his stuff and just disappeared.
Yeah. Wow.
Just left high and dry the facility. They had an administrator one day, the next day, no administrator. He would not take any calls. He packed up his house and moved out of state.
Yeah.
That was the craziest thing I've ever seen. I say that to say that you're right. Sometimes nurses are not listened to. We are not heard. But we have to continue to fight the fight. We have to continue to step up. And I'm encouraged by that, by the nurses that have taken to the picket line even and say, hey, you know what? These staffing ratios aren't safe. This is really affecting not just our license, but patients' lives. And I think that as more people in the public see this and understand what's happening, they're kind of like, hey, wait a minute. What do you mean that if you take more than 2 patients and I'm in the ICU, that it's actually Medicare fraud? You know, that was also brought up recently. And that you're also paying for services that you're not getting with your tax dollars because corporations are wanting to add extra staffing, extra patients onto the nurses, and already working nurses that are tired and beyond tired. When I tell you, my husband a few years ago was in the hospital, and the nurse told me, oh, we're out of medication. We're running out of medication in the pharmacy. So we have to give him like 3 of these pills to make up for the 1 pill that he needs because we're running out of medicine. That's concerning. And then to have on top of that, what happened with St. Vincent and Ascension with the change thing, and they took over and they had to pay all that money to get their ransomware, all this stuff taken off. And then you had this happen with what was it? Optum, and their systems went down. We're starting to see all of these things affect healthcare. And I think that consumers are suddenly waking up to the fact that, hey, we've got to fix something in our healthcare because this is really getting bad and getting dire. But there's also wonderful things about healthcare, things that are coming out. I'm seeing more nurses now who are being innovative and are creating things and are now creating new technology. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. There's a creator that I follow on TikTok, and it's such a simple device, but it clamps onto the side rail and you run your tubes through it. She calls it the beta clamp, I think.
Oh,
and
wow.
it just helps. Now, I'm an ER nurse, so I don't care where my tubes go, but for ICU nurses,
Yes.
I can see the value in it. But even with things like the the nurse call button, okay, or your PCA button. They can run through there and they won't fall off the bed onto the floor as the patient moves around. And that a nurse invented that. I was talking with a nurse, one of the clinical instructors that brings students to the hospital where I work, and she created a product that is a patient education tool for their medicines called Color My Medicines, and it breaks down the medicines into, each type of medicine is a different color, and it's all written at a level that's appropriate for most patients. But this was a product that she developed, and she has in a few hospitals around the country, because as a nurse, she saw this deficit where she was still working bedside. She's now in academia, but she was working bedside still when she saw this. She's developed it at the hospital where she was working, and then actually has a patent on it and has started selling it to other facilities and in nursing schools as well. But like you said, it was a nurse that innovated and created something brand new, because of a need that she saw in her own practice.
And that is what I want to say. One of the reasons why we created the show was because I wanted to highlight these things that people may not know about, that nurses can create things and be innovative and invent things, and have done historically and continue to do so. And the public still sees us as handmaidens, basically, of the physician. Right. And we need to change that narrative. And I think of the TV shows that are out there now, Grey's Anatomy, where the nurses are basically invisible unless they're giving you syphilis, right? Yeah, that was an episode. That's the only time I remember really seeing a nurse play a prominent role on the episode of Grey's Anatomy, was because she gave the physician syphilis. That's what I remember. And I don't watch the show very much anymore since McDreamy died. So there you go. There's my confession about that. But I think about how some of these newer shows glamorize what the physicians do, like The Resident and all of that. That's great. But I can't remember the last time I saw a doctor start IVs.
Mm-mm. I work at a teaching hospital that has a great number of residents. They're everywhere. They don't start IVs. Half of the stuff that show, Grey's Anatomy, it shows physicians doing, even residents, they're not doing that stuff. No. And again, I have no disrespect for those individuals, but I do have a lack of respect for the show, because you're right. And then think about the one show that did feature nurses, Nurse Jackie. She was a cocaine addict and was a complete freaking lunatic.
Yes.
So we finally get a show that features a nurse, and she's totally off the rails.
The best show that I really loved that showed nurses in a positive light was ER.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
did they say that came to my mind?
Did they make medical mistakes? Oh yes. In fact, that was fun in nursing school to sit there and go, okay, now let's count the med errors that they're making. Oh, there's one. We got one. Actually, full disclosure, we used to do shots to that in nursing school. We would watch ER. It became a drinking game. Sorry, ER. Yeah. But I love the show, and Nurse Hathaway was one of the reasons why, because it showed her as a competent nurse. Did she have problems? Yes.
Yeah.
But she overcame them. And then they decided, we're going to send her to medical school. And then she decided not to go to medical school. And I was like, thank God. You don't need to go to medical school. You can, do something else in your nursing career. The only thing that I bone to pick at with ER was that they had a nurse practitioner on the show. I was so excited. And then they made her crazy.
Of course.
I'm like, okay, well, great. There's that. But otherwise, I love the show. MASH was another one that I love, but that's a whole other story about why I love that one.
Yeah.
But I think, and I am dating myself here, but I think that today's show just kind of focuses on the doctor as a hero. And I'm not bashing doctors. I will say that because I have doctors that I really respect that I work with, and in my family, which is one of the reasons why I became a nurse, because I had them in my family and I saw the lifestyle and I'm like, yeah, I don't do that. I don't want to be on call 24/7. and never have any time and freedom with your family. And then of course I go into nurse management, and then I'm on call 24/7.
Right.
And I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. So, but I just I think that we need to showcase those nurses that are doing great things, and I want our future nurses to hear this. Is that that could be you? I want
Yeah.
them to see this show, look at you, and say that could be me 24 years later.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Well, and I think that it's also, so one of the things I do. So I have a podcast as well that it, I've been inactive for a while. I'm getting ready to relaunch it. But one of the series that I do on there is what I call roles in nursing, where I just interview people that doing a variety of different types of roles within nursing. And I spent like 45 minutes talking to a school nurse about her job. I learned a ton about it, but I think that, like you said, it's important that these young nurses realize that there are options.
Yes.
There are so many different things that we can do. As part of the reason that I became a nurse to begin with, like I said earlier, it was to support my family, but I knew that I'd always have a job and that I could do so. I had so many options within that job. And that's one of the things to this day that I love about. So I mentioned earlier, I spent most of my career in the ER, almost 20 years. That included a few years as a tech. But I've also done informatics, interventional radiology. I did outpatient oncology. I've done, and most recently for the past 5 years, education, both in hospital and in academia. And I love that if I get bored, I can go try something else, And
Yes.
I think that or not even just bored, if I get burned out in this one area. I think a lot of people think, a lot of nurses, they get to that point where something has to change, and what they start thinking of is, I've got to leave nursing. When in reality, what they may need to do is find either a different place to work or a different role within the organization they're in, or a different specialty at a different place. I don't know, but there are options. And I think that's what our younger nurses especially need to understand. But even our more experienced nurses, oftentimes they feel stuck. This is what
Yes.
I do. I am a this nurse. Well, no, you have been a this nurse, but have you considered maybe doing this that might make you happier and better fit your life, be more fulfilling, et cetera, et cetera? And oftentimes the answer is no, because this is what I do. Yeah, but it's making you miserable.
Exactly. I find it, or they may decide that getting a graduate degree is going to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And that may or may not be the case.
Right.
And sometimes the more education is not what you need. And I'm not knocking education,
Right.
believe me. But I also know that if it's just that one other thing, you put in all that time and expense into something that you're not really committed to, it's not going to be that much better.
Right.
And so my philosophy has always been you can leave your job, you don't have to leave your profession.
Yeah.
So if maybe being at the bedside in the OR or a med surge or the ER, uh, PACU, any of those other places don't fit your life anymore, why not look for something that will? Maybe you would be a great dialysis nurse because you have all this experience, and now you can bring it to a field that's a little bit different, and you can work outpatient, you can work inpatient, you can do so many different things. And I think that what we need to do is to make those pathways clearer for nurses. So
Yeah.
if you want to change specialties, great. All right, let's build a pathway to bridge you to a new specialty. One of the things, having worked in psychiatry for a very long time, one of the things that I noticed is that when I would get nurses that came from the med surge type areas and they want to come into psychiatry, it's almost like teaching them a brand new skill. It's like they can't shut off the med surgery part. And I'm like, yes, I understand that, but we can't do that here. We don't have that here. We got an oxygen tank and an AED. If they go down, you're doing CPR till the ambulance comes, because
Right.
they can't die on a psych unit. If
Right.
they die on a psych unit, that means we get the feds in here, the states in here, because they died on a psych unit.
Right.
Okay. I said, so we will code you until you get to the ER. Okay. I don't care what your advanced directive
Yeah.
says. You're going to be coded till you get to the ER, because you can't die here. All right. That's all we know. And I say that, and I make light of it, but I think that when you're switching specialties like that, particularly when it's a specialty that's completely different from what you've done before, there is that learning curve, and you have to be willing to accept that maybe how you've always done things is not how it's done in other specialties, and there are reasons for that.
Yeah, I've experienced the same thing with folks that transfer to the emergency department, and there's that that skill set that they developed, whether it was as a med surg or ICU nurse or whatever else, and they transition to the ER, and those things are tools that they can use in the ER, but the environment is different. And so they have to learn a new way of thinking and new routines and all that. And you're right. Historically, there's not been a transition for that. The last hospital I worked at before where I'm at now, they actually did have a nurse intern program for people moving into specialty areas that were experienced nurses. So if you're going to the ER, and it was a shorter than if you were a brand new nurse, okay, which makes sense. But if you're going to the ER, to the ICU, maybe even OB, I think they did an OB as well, then, and probably others, but those are the ones I'm aware of, then you did have kind of an internship program that did. So it was that pathway that you talked about, but that is very rare. We have those internships for or residencies for brand new nurses, but for the nurse transitioning from one specialty to another, you're right, that pathway doesn't really exist, and it's kind of put on the nurse
Yes.
to figure it out.
I think if we would make it easier, I've had nurses that worked in the hospital come to work in long-term care. And what a reality shock it is, because they'd say, oh, we ordered this stat. I'm like, yeah, stat in long-term care can mean 4 hours.
Right.
It's a whole different
Or
world.
more.
Or more. You're right, because we may not get that medicine till the next day,
Right.
depending on when the shipment comes. I mean, we have certain things on hand,
Sure.
but it's to be more of a residential facility, not necessarily acute medical. We'll do some acute things, but that's why we send them to the ER, to the hospital, because
Yeah.
it's outside of our capability. We've done what we could, and so they need a higher level of care. And for them to understand that, I think, has been a little bit difficult. And it's in the same transition. If you're coming from long-term care and you're suddenly thrown up a med surge, it's going to be a whole lot different in your level of urgency, right?
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
I encourage nurses to explore, find out what makes you excited, and be open to learning new things. I've been in several different facilities myself, and I've
Yeah.
learned so many different things, just different areas, and I've been blessed to be able to experience things. I was on med surg as a tech, and I knew right then and there that's not what I wanted to do. I've been there, done that for so long. And I didn't do it as a nurse. But I also knew I wanted to sit down and talk to my patients more and understand where they're coming from. And I gravitated to psychiatry, and so I ended up on a medical psych unit. So I had to start IVs and do all the medical stuff, but I also had a chance to sit down and understand, okay, why are you where you are now? What happened to you that got you here? And that's a very different type of nursing than maybe in the ER, where it's like, okay, the backstory not as much as important as what's happening right now, because we want to get you stable and keep you alive. That's our goal. Whereas my goal is, okay, how can we help you rebuild your life so when you leave, you don't come back, right? So those types of things. So as we begin to kind of wrap up here, I wanted to know, If you had a piece of advice for a budding entrepreneur, what would it be?
Just do it. Just put yourself out there. Whatever it is that you're thinking about, whatever it is that you're dreaming about, whatever it is the problem is that you've identified that you think you can solve, just get out there and start doing it. Seek out other people that are doing it. But the bottom line is you've got to start doing it. I fear that, and I've struggled with this myself from time to time, paralysis of analysis, where we think we need to have all of the things figured out. And the reality is until you start doing it, then you're not going to figure the things out. So, and here's the other thing. You have to start doing something before you can really figure out what it is that you want to do.
Yes.
So I have tried a number in my own business. I've tried a number of different things so I've been at this about probably 2 or 3 years now, but trying to determine how is it? I know I want to serve nurses. Okay. How do I want to serve them? And I only was able to figure that out by getting out there and doing stuff. So as the wise philosopher says, just do it.
I so agree. Now, you do have an offer for our listeners. You are giving them the first chapter of your books, The Restored Nurse and Healthy Start for New Nurses. And so you're also offering your Restoring Nurses Life Assessment. If they use the code restoringnurses.com/shark. So I will put that on the show notes as well. But yeah, so they can go to your website and give us your website again.
Restoringnurses.com. And if they just go to restoringnurses.com/shark, like you said, then it'll be right there. And I even have a little video for them that I recorded specifically for the listeners of the show.
All right. So there you have it, folks. It will be in the show notes for you to pick up. So if you don't forget to check those out. And I want to thank you, Matt, for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation. It's going to be so helpful to our listeners just to hear from a nurse that's in the trenches, has been there, now in education, but it's really focusing on helping nurses to fall back in love with their profession. And I'm all about that. So I want to thank you for being here.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Well, that ends our show today, folks. So don't forget to like and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and hit that notification bell so that you'll be notified when all of our videos come out. And also, if you're listening to us on our audio podcast through Podbean or wherever you get your podcast, please leave us a comment and a like. We greatly appreciate it. Share this content with others, and we thank you for your time. Have a great rest of your day. Nurses, are you ready for more? My mission is for you to own your seat at the table of nurse entrepreneurship, gaining confidence, skills, and the freedom to live your life on your own terms. Assisting you in achieving your goals through tailored advice, continuous learning, and a collaborative approach is at the heart of everything I do. Stop being eaten alive. Come feel the sun. Be a nurse shark. Thank you for listening to the Nurse Shark Academy show wherever you get your podcasts or watching us on YouTube. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you'll know when all of our episodes come out. If you want further information, you can contact us on the NurseSharkAcademy.biz.